This month was a whirlwind of variety. I read everything from horror to fantasy to weird books to fiction to graphic novels and more. So let's get into it right now. At the end, I will tell you my two favorites because I had two that were my absolute favorites. So the first book I read was Silver Nitrate by Silvia Moreno Garcia. And I absolutely loved this book. It's about the film industry in Mexico in the 90s. It has all this weird stuff going on with the occult, strange, mystical things and magic, and silver nitrate was something that used to be used in film back in the day. It's very highly flammable, but also, on another hand, silver has very magical properties, and the whole premise of the book is there was this film by this director that was never completed, and he had gotten into this weird group of people that was basically kind of like a cult. They wanted to cast this spell and do it through film because the film, as the one main leader guy believed, would kind of amplify the magic, charge it as a battery as more people saw it and make it more powerful. But it was never completed. A bunch of stuff happened. It seemed like people were cursed and whatnot. And so they're going to complete the circuit and complete the spell, but with different people. And this story was great. It was so weird. I flippin' loved it. If you like Silvia Moreno Garcia, if you haven't read her before, I would highly recommend this. Maybe start at this one. I still need to read Mexican Gothic. The only other one I read by her was The Daughter of Dr. Moreau, which I thought was alright, but this one was fan-flippantastic. The next book I read was Devolution by Max Brooks, and this is a Bigfoot fiction. It is crazy. Mount Rainier erupts. There's this like whole little like I almost want to call it like a commune of these people who live up on Mount Rainier, and they have smart homes, everything's super eco-friendly, but they need Wi-Fi to exist and to thrive. And when Mount Rainier erupts, that cuts off their way off the mountain, and it cuts out the Wi-Fi. The lava didn't come down the path towards them, but they're cut off from society. They have no cell phone signals and all this stuff. All of a sudden, as time starts to pass, the creatures in the area are disappearing, and all the fruit and stuff off the trees is disappearing. Eventually, the humans realize there is what seems to be a group of Bigfoot in the area that are just trying to survive. And what do they need to survive? Food. And when all the creatures are gone, what food is left? Well, the humans. So it's how the humans react in this situation. It's a survival situation. Will any of them survive, or will they all become fodder for the Bigfoots? And I felt like this was like a situation that if it actually happened, this is kind of how it might actually go. And it was so well done. It was awesome. The next thing I read was The Puzzle Master by Danielle Trussoni. I thought this book was a lot of fun. It's about this guy. His name, I believe, is Mike. He's in high school. He is going to receive football scholarship he has all lined up, and there's some other ones, like whether he wins the game or loses the game, there's still going to be scholarships, and he has a whole bright future. He's super popular. But then he gets knocked the F out on the football field. It causes a sort of like brain trauma, but it unlocks all this weird genius level puzzle solving ability in him. And then he has synesthesia where he sees numbers as color and sound as color and all this stuff. So he is contacted by the psychiatrist from this all women's prison, and she has this prisoner who doesn't want to communicate with people, but she does all this dude's puzzles because he's does puzzles for the New York Times. So she does those, and that's kind of like maybe kept her from, I don't know, going completely crazy or whatever they think. And so the psychiatrist thinks that if this guy maybe will just talk to this woman, maybe it'll bring her out of her shell, they'll have a breakthrough in communication, and da 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 da. And she was put away for murder, but during her trial, she refused to say a word about anything that happened. Like, she didn't defend herself, she didn't say anything. So the psychiatrist is like, what the heck? And so when they finally meet, it opens up a can of worms, stuff gets super weird. There is like magic and occult and, you know, weird puzzles, sacred geometry, creepy dolls. There's a lot going on in it, and it was a really fun book. After that, I read The Lake Michigan Mothman by Tobias Wayland. This is a collection of accounts of Mothman sightings over the years, but in more recent times. In like the 2000s, it goes up to I think 2017. So if you're interested in case studies and whatnot, It doesn't really have story flow or elements to it because it is a nonfiction book and it's basically people's experiences about it. Wayland's history of himself and how he got into the field and all of that. And it's just an interesting book if you want to know more about Mothman sightings in more present times and in the Lake Michigan area. So, you know, there's sightings in Indiana, Illinois, Michigan. I can't remember if there was any in Wisconsin, maybe not. After that, I read a newer Brandon Sanderson book, The Frugal Wizard's Guide to Surviving Medieval England. And at first, it was a little slow going, but I believe that was due to a lot of the character building that had to happen to get you into the story. It's super weird. This guy wakes up in the middle of like a field. There's scorch marks all around him, half-burnt papers, which is the papers of the wizard's Frugal guide, and doesn't remember who he is, doesn't know where he is, doesn't know what's going on. He gets up and he, I guess, tries to find a town and figure out what's happening and who he is and why he's there. It's a mix of olden times and current times and future. It's such a strange, wacky fantasy read. I had a lot of fun with it and it was pretty enjoyable. I do have a standalone review of that. If you'd like to check it out, I'll put a link down below to that. Next up, we read an indie horror called Suffer the Darkness by Yolanda Svetsos. And that book is got some Exorcist vibes going on. It was a lot of fun to read. It's a shorter book. It follows the story of this teenager who disappeared and was gone for like a year and a half. One day she turns up in this car with this woman that crashed into the hospital. And her mom, stating the sheriff of the town, is like, they found her. So she rushes to the hospital to get there and to see her daughter. And she's super excited, but she's worried and all this stuff because, she's been missing for a year and a half. And like when she finally gets to see her daughter again, things just don't seem right. As I said, Exorcist vibes, weird, creepy stuff going on. A mysterious nature entity of the woods. It's weird. The ending is wild. At first I wasn't sure how I felt about the ending, but then I was like, you know what, I really liked it. It was not what I expected was going to happen. So I guess that's always nice when it can surprise you with what happens. Next up, I read the book Chrysalis by Anna Metcalf, and this is a debut novel for this author. She's done other short stories and whatnot. The writing is phenomenal. The way everything's described, and it's like describing these daily Monday things. It's so beautifully written. Like it pulled me in immediately. The flow of the words is fantastic, and it's about human metamorphosis. It's about growing as a person, evolving, and overcoming and so many things. So it follows the story of this woman and how she's seen through the eyes of like 3 different people. One is this guy Elliot who meets her at a gym later in life when she just exudes confidence and positivity and is almost radiant, and he views her as this amazing creature and being. And then you see her through the eyes of her mother, who was a single mother, growing up, raising her, how they butted heads, and just the weird dynamic of their relationship and all of that, how all the effed up stuff that happened to the daughter. And you then see her flaws, which you did not see through the eyes of Elliot, but then you start to see some of the flaws. And then you also see there's this other woman who kind of came to her aid when the crap hit the fan, and how she saw her and what happened when she was getting out of this really terrible situation. And it was just really well written and very beautiful. I cannot wait to read more by this author. I just really love the style of writing. Next up, I read The Reservoir by David Duchovny. David Duchovny, the actor. This book is like a weird fever dream street poet philosophy story that ebbs and flows in just such a weird and wondrous narrative. It is fantastical and it's in and out of reality. It's so weird, and the ending was very emotional. It takes place during COVID in New York City. There's this guy Ridley. He's a former Wall Street veteran, and his apartment overseeing Central Park and the reservoir. Every night he sets up his phone to take like a time-lapse photo of when the sun goes down over the reservoir, and he's trying to do it for 365 days so that at the end maybe he'll give it to an art museum or something. At some point in time he sees like this light at night in the middle of the night, like flashing on like it's Morse code, and it happens every evening, and he's like, what the heck? And he's like, I want to figure out who this person is and what's happening and what's going on. And this is what leads into this weird fever dream crazy trip of a book. It was really enjoyable to read. It was so weird. I don't even know what I would compare it to. No idea. It was wild. Was it kind of like a Midsummer Night's Dream? I don't know. It was some weird stuff and it was pretty great. Then we read one of my favorite horror/thriller authors, Darcy Coates' Dead of Winter. Anxiety sets in from like the first page because you get into it and it's like, you're lost in a blizzard, help! This girl Krista and her boyfriend Kieran are going on this trip to Colorado in the mountains in the middle of winter. There's this whole tour group that they're going with. There's like 10 people on a bus and they have to stop the bus because there's a tree down on the road and they gotta move the tree and all that. So these two get lost in a dang blizzard. Eventually everyone ends up in this weird, creepy cabin in the middle of nowhere, and they figure they'll set out the next day, get to the lodge that they're going to for their vacation, and stuff starts to go wrong and people start to get picked off one by one. Who is the killer? Why are they doing it? I mean, I always have fun with Darcy Coates books, and this one also, good time. Next, I read another indie horror, which is awesome. It's called Lacunas Point by Tim Meyer. This book was flippin' fantastic. It's a chunkier one. I think it was like 300 plus pages, maybe a little longer. There's these two girls who are on their way to Georgetown. They're gonna go to college, and they stop at the town of Lacunas Point on the way, and the one girl is supposed to like meet some boy there and whatnot, but they also decide to stop at this art festival, and then they're never heard from ever again. 3 years later, the parents get these text messages from the girls, and they're two separate parents. They're not like the two girls had from two different families. They get text messages of their daughters in front of this weird clock tower. And so the one mother, she ends up triangulating like where the signal kind of came from in that area. And so her and the dad of the other girl end up setting off to try and find their kids. And they're going to this town that maybe doesn't exist. They get there and they find it, and there is a town, even though the gas station they stopped at, the gas station guy was like, oh yeah, that's been long abandoned, there's nothing there anymore, but you can go check it out, whatever. So they get there and it's a full town of really weird, creepy people, and stuff just seems super off. They are determined to find their daughters, and there's just some weird stuff going on there in this liminal town that may or may not exist in the same dimension. I'm not really sure how all of it works. And there's this clock tower that when the clock tower goes off, run the other way, because all the townsfolk start walking towards it like they're weird old zombies. The two parents, they like black out when the bell tolls, and just all sorts of weird stuff starts happening, and it was awesome. There's this weird like cultish type creepy townfolk, this what's going on with the clock tower, why do these people seem like weird zombies, is there something wrong with the brains, who knows. Well, I know, you need to read it. I would call it cosmic horror, and it's freaking wild. I loved it. It was so good. Another banger put out by Darklit Press, dude. And then I read the graphic novel The Tea Dragon Society. I've heard two different booktubers talk about this graphic novel series, which was Allison Page's and Kristen Crave's books. And both of them loved it. And so I picked up the first one, and it's flippin' adorable. It's so cute. The illustrations are darling, and it's just this heartfelt little feel-good book. You can read it in like an hour. So now I need to get the other ones. I got it from the library. When I got it, like it looks like a children's book, which it could be. It's easy enough to read. I would say definitely children can read it, but it's for adults too. It's just a lovely, awesomely illustrated story. And then in the back, it tells you all like the different stuff about the different types of tea dragons and the history of that. It was super cute. It was a great rec by those two booktubers. Okay, so my favorite two books that I read. That's the worst drum roll. I always give the worst drum rolls. I should just use a sound effect. That would be better, right? Well, anyway, too late for that. So my favorite two books this month that I read was Silver Nitrate by Sylvia Moreno Garcia and Lacunas Point by Tim Meyer. It was awesome. I loved that book so much. If you were a fan of videos where I talk about multiple books that I've read or am reading, the next video coming up will be about that, so stick around, check it out. And if you had fun hanging out today, hit that subscribe button, come back, see me again, and we'll talk about more bookish things and weird stuff.